Hi everyone, sorry about the delay. Thank you to everybody who is attending, either online, hi, and thanks to the few people in the room. It's really great to be talking to real people. So my presentation today is called Makalu, a graphic novel journey. So I'm gonna get started right away. Okay, so my name is Esther. I'm a geologist and an artist. And as part of my artistic activity, I do a bunch of different things. Next, please. So I've been doing painting and drawing for many years. And a few years ago, I basically, out of my interest for graphic novels since forever, I've been reading them lots. Growing up in France, as you may know, we have a lot of amazing comic artists out of France and Belgium. And so I've been fed with that throughout my childhood. And a few years ago, I decided that I wanted to make my own comics. So for that, I took a series of courses and workshops. I went on to Emily Carr University in Vancouver for some continuing education classes. And I also took a workshop at the Center for Cartoon Studies in Vermont. And so once I was done with all these basic training, I needed a story to tell, because graphic novel is not just about pretty pictures. Ultimately, it's about telling a story. So this is where we come to the point of why Makalu, why did I decide to talk about this part of the word? So first of all, there's a family connection with Makalu. I have a great uncle, Pierre Bordet, who used to be a geologist, and he spent about 20 years of his career working as a geologist across the Himalayas. So he spent a lot of his time in Nepal, but he also worked in Pakistan and Afghanistan. And the reason why he was there originally was back in the 50s, basically France put together an expedition to Nepal. That was like the first time France was attempting one of the higher summit of Nepal. And Pierre Bordet was part of that expedition as a geologist. And myself, it's been a few years that based out of that common interest for geology and travels, I wanted to go to Nepal on his tracks, but he went all over Nepal. During the 20 years that he spent in the country, he went all over. So I had to choose a destination to just make it a realistic trip for myself. And it just so happens that the first time he ever went to Nepal was at Makalu for that as part of this French expedition. So based on this and for other reasons, for my interest for that particular trek, I also decided to go to Makalu for my first trip to Nepal. And so I ended up going there in April 2019. So just to situate you a little bit, so this is a very sketched map of where Nepal is with relationship to the rest of the Asian countries. So India is to the south, Pakistan to the west, Tibet and China to the north. The Himalayas are a huge mountain range. They are over 2,000 kilometers long. And within the Himalayas, there's over 50 peaks that are over 7,000 meters high. And out of these very high summits, 10 of those are over 8,000 meters. And for Nepal alone, so 8 out of these 14 summits are located in Nepal only. So Nepal really has a really high concentration of these highest peaks in the world. Just because we're talking about the life of a geologist, I had to throw a little bit of geology in there. So I'm not a specialist of Nepal geology, but what I found as in a really quick search is that the oldest rocks there are about 500 million years old. And as you may know, the Himalayas were formed as a result of the collision between India and the Eurasian plate. And that happened between 40 to 50 million years ago. So at the geologic scale, the Himalayas are a fairly recent mountain range. So zooming in into Nepal. So Nepal is a pretty small country, all things considered. the topography is really rugged. So the entire northern part of the country is basically formed by this high mountain range. And the southern part is where most of the population concentrates, because it's mostly plains and kind of foothills, the foothills of the Himalayas. The population of Nepal is 29 million. And in Kathmandu only, there's 1.5 million people. Yeah, so that's where it starts. So we're gonna take a little dive into the streets of Kathmandu next. As a traveler these days, if you head to Nepal, unless you decide to go by road, which is pretty unusual, you most likely gonna land in Kathmandu. It is a very overwhelming place to be, especially when you come from Whitehorse. I basically got to see more people in a day than I get to see in a year. So it was really overwhelming, but it's a very vibrant city for sure. And I got to enjoy it a lot more after I was back from the trail and after I had been like for 3 weeks, like in the middle of nowhere. You can see there's some very interesting electrical architecture around the city. It's a little terrifying. Also, when I was there, so that was 2019, there were debris all over the place from the earthquake that took place back in 2015. So still a lot of destruction visible from that earthquake. There's obviously like challenging for reconstructing things in a country like that. Like it's there's poverty, there's lack of infrastructure and everything. So you could see the marks of that earthquake as if it was yesterday. So from Kathmandu, we're gonna head to eastern Nepal and basically head to the Makalu area. So the way I decided to travel was by plane. So I took a small plane from Kathmandu to Tumlingtar. In Nepal, basically, if you travel around the countryside, you have two options. Either risk your life on the roads or risk your life on the plane. So I basically chose the fastest way. So this is the site you usually get when you get to the domestic terminal, cancellations and closed airports everywhere, mostly due to weather. So you have to imagine that these countries basically, so India is just in the south, the climate is quite warm and basically subtropical, and there's all this heat and humidity coming from the south and basically bouncing out these really high mountain range. And so all the humidity just stagnate there, and that creates some pretty thick weather systems. And I was not there at a time that I was like a month before the monsoon even started, but it was pretty impressive. So we eventually took off, and you know, you basically like cross your fingers when you land these planes, and eventually make it to eastern Nepal. So this is a bit more of a close-up to the area that I was traveling across. So Tumlingtar and Kanbari are some of the main little towns in that part of Nepal. It is a fairly remote area, and basically some important geographic features are up here, the Arun River, which basically goes from north to south. This is a major waterway, and basically back in the 50s, when the French expedition came to Nepal, there were actually no planes going to Kathmandu at the time. So they had to get in from India, from the south. And they basically hiked along the Arun River Valley all the way up to Makalu. The second important geographic feature is the Barun River. So it's just off on this map here, just off the Arun River towards the west. And basically the Barun River is fed by a glacier that is basically sitting at the base of Mount Makalu. So these are like important geographic features that kind of define the landscape in that area. Mount Makalu is located in a national park, and basically the last village you get to, so you can drive a jeep from Kanbari to Noom, and after that the road ends and you're on your feet until Makalu. So this is a bit of a picture to show you the drive from Canberra to Noom. The road was in a pretty terrible state. I'm really glad it was only a 4 hours jeep ride in my life, because I can't imagine spending 4 days on roads like that. This is basically the view I got for the entire way. So as you see, the weather system is no joke. It basically took until 2 days into the trek until I could get a view of the mountains. Like I knew I was in the Himalayas, I just couldn't see them. So it was definitely a little worrying at first. And this is the actual Makalu trail. So again, you arrive in Noom, and then from that point on, you're on foot, and you basically go through a few small villages, Sedowa and Tashigan, that are under 3,000 meters. And Tashigan is basically the last time you're in some sort of a civilization. After that, there's a big pass called Shiptonla that's over 4,000 meters. And that's a very big landmark and a big separation between the world where civilization is and things grow, and you can eat vegetables and chicken and stuff like that. And on the other side, it's barren. There's nothing that grows except for potatoes. There's no human that live. So everything that is brought in terms of like food and logistical support on the other side of the pass is brought on man's back. And yaks, I heard, but I never got to see any yaks because there was a lot of snow when I was there. So basically, in terms of elevation, you go up all the way up to 4,000 meters, then you go back down into the Barun River Valley. And then from that point on, you follow the Barun River Valley all the way to the base of the glacier where the base camp is located. And Makalu base camp is just under 5,000 meters. So it's fairly high. I'm going to show a few pictures from the trail, and this is to kind of show you the diversity of landscapes you cross along this. So that's basically like for me, it was a 17 days journey round trip. So it's a fairly long trip, and it's a round trip. It's not a loop, and you go across everything. I was very surprised and unimpressed at how the jungle thrives all the way up to 3,500 meters. It's quite incredible, again, because of the climate, because of the monsoon. So I personally love the kind of barren tundra landscapes we get up in the Yukon. I had nothing like that up there. It was forest everywhere. You can see on these pictures, Nima, one of our guides, he's carrying an umbrella. It was pouring rain for the first 2 days. Again, no view. It was also raining leeches. So umbrella had like a double protection purpose. This is one of the villages, Sedowa. You can see some of the constructions are still very rustic and traditional. There's also a lot of constructions these days that are made out of tin and wood, very simple. But you have to think that every single construction material is brought on man's back. Like I literally saw people carrying, you know, these long, like 10-foot tin sheets, carrying them on their back, rolled for like hours and hours. So it's quite impressive to see that this can happen. Again, some pretty dramatic mineral landscape. This is the pass. This is Shiptonla, which I was mentioning earlier. This photo is really associated with a lot of very difficult memory. That was a very challenging day physically. There was a lot of snow. It just so happened that the year that I go there, they had an unusual amount of snow over the winter. Of course, I was actually really worried about avalanches that day. It was really warm. The snowpack was really thick and heavy. And when you don't know an area, you just like, what do I do? And the local people had zero awareness about avalanches. So I just followed the lead and crossed my fingers. Everything went well. So we can see the weather is pretty bleak. Again, this was actually kind of the best view we had that day. It was white out for the entire day. I still managed to get a sunstroke. I don't know how, but yeah. And I really love that picture for you Yukoners, because I find that it totally looks like some of the historic pictures from the Chilkoot Pass, from the gold rush. So I really, really like that one. And on the other side, so you go over that pass and you're back into the jungle. And at that point, you are like at 3,500 meters. So the jungle is really thriving. This is into the Barun River Valley. So the river that basically feeds from that glacier. And things become very mineral at that point. The jungle is definitely still there, but the country is like totally wild at that point. And you basically follow that river all the way up to Makalu. And at that point, we're back into the snow. So it was kind of a roller coaster in terms of what we're going to be hiking on. And eventually base camp. So this is base camp kind of in the back there. You can see a few little buildings. Base camp was dry. It's really dry. It's, again, almost 5,000 meters elevation. So there was no snow. And Makalu is sitting right there. So there's basically like over 3,000 meters of elevation gain right in your face. It's quite an impressive sight. So I had promised you a travel in space, and now we're gonna start the travel in time. So we're gonna take the time machine and go back all the way to the 50s. So this is the same mountain we were looking at, but this is a shot taken by Pierre Bordet, my great uncle, in the fall of 1954. So his first trip to Nepal. And as you can see, the mountain hasn't changed that much, and the quality of the picture is really impressive. So Pierre was taking a lot of photographs. He took a lot of photographs of landscapes in particular. And for me, it's amazing material for building this story that I'm working on, because I have this amazing visual archive that I can use. So Pierre, that's him. I have only a few photographs of him, and on every single one of them, he's wearing a beret, very French. So this is why I decided to represent him like that in the graphic novel. So one of the challenges that I'm having in this story is that I'm telling the story of people that I barely knew or didn't know at all, at a time that obviously I wasn't born. So even though Pierre was a member of my family, I don't have access to all the information I wish I had. I cannot interview him. He passed away when I was about 12 years old, so I was not even set on being a geologist at that time. And also he turns out to be, he was apparently a very shy and discreet man. And also he had a bit of a double life. So he was a geologist, but he was also a priest. He was a very spiritual person. And when I asked my family about him, so my dad and my aunts and uncle, they don't know him that much. They say when he was visiting the family, he would be wearing his priest robe and be very, very shy about his life. And they suspect that he was a very different person when he was on all these geologic expeditions with different people. And I started to have a little bit of a glimpse on that by reaching out to other people who knew him professionally. But yeah, it is hard because I have to basically build up a character based on not that much evidence. So I've depicted him here. These are two separate panels from the story. He's on the first one, he's looking through a microscope. That was actually his specialty. He was a mineralogist. He was specialized in volcanic rocks. And he actually invented a polarizing microscope, so to be able to better understand the structure of crystals. He was teaching geology in a Catholic institute near Paris. So that's basically what he was doing when he got when he applied to these Himalayan expeditions and got selected. So before he went to the Himalayas, he was already doing work all over the place. So he was a mineralogist, but he was also a field geologist, and his specialty was mapping. And this other panel here is inspired from another picture of him that I have, where he's riding a camel, and that's actually located in Algeria, so North Africa, and he was studying a very unique volcanic field in that part of the world. And that's basically, again, what he was doing just before he got sent to Nepal. So the context of why did my great uncle end up working in Nepal? Why did France send an expedition to climb one of the highest summits in the world? So that was the early 50s. It was full-on colonizing mode for some of these European countries. And I find it very interesting for me to be researching through all that now that I live in Canada. And as you know, colonization is a big deal in this country as well. So I get to look at colonization from a different angle, and from the angle of my home country, and from a different type of colonization that happened in different parts of the world, but same idea. And basically what I get out of that, and the way that I'm trying to talk about it in the book, is that a lot of these European countries were already emplaced in a lot of parts of the world. So for France had a lot of colonies all over Africa, a little bit in Asia, but like Nepal was a little bit out of the realm of that. However, Nepal was, what I said at the beginning was, out of the 14 highest summits in the world, Nepal has 8 of them. And I guess when you're a colonizing country, you want to go higher and you want to literally dominate the world. So that's basically what they were doing. And that's, it's actually pretty crazy to look at it from this angle, but a lot of the Himalayan conquest and Himalayan exploration was basically fed from colonization. So they had 8 summits in Nepal, and Nepal was actually a closed kingdom until the late 40s. They were basically completely closing access to any foreigners. And early 50s, they started to open up. And so all these colonizing countries just like engulfed in the bridge. And it was like first come, first serve for all these higher summits. A bit of a race. And obviously the highest of all, Everest, was up for grab, and that was the best because, you know, higher and bigger has to be better. So they were all after Everest, and they were basically like, there was a waiting list. It was like, okay, the English are going. If they miss, the French are next. So the French were on the list for the Everest, but unfortunately they missed it because the British Empire got it first. Ironically, the 2 men who climbed Everest first were not British. I mean, it was a Kiwi and a Sherpa. So yeah, congratulations to them. So the French were like pretty disappointed to not have made it to Everest. And basically they were like, okay, what can we do that's gonna be obviously not as high as Everest because that was the highest, but at least as challenging so that we can stand up to that reputation that we can keep up for ourselves. So Makalu was on the list. Makalu was known to be a very challenging mountain. It was mostly unknown at the time. There had been 0 attempt to climb it. A few, I think the Swiss had been kind of establishing a route towards a base camp. But aside from that, there was not much. So the French basically, when they went in, they had to figure out an access route. And this is why they decided to go in 2 separate expeditions. So the first one in the fall of '54 was a reconnaissance expedition. And they basically tried the mountain on every single angle they could. And then they figured out a route that was gonna work. And so they went back in the spring of '55 to actually do the ascent. So I have a lot of information from these 2 expeditions from 2 main sources. The first one is the notes that my great uncle compiled about his adventures. And that book is called, literally, it's like Memory of My Hammers. And again, he did not only work in the Himalayas, he worked all over the world. So this book actually compiles all of his adventures throughout his life. Most of it is about the work he did in Nepal, though. So this is written in a very journaling way. It's not big literature, but that's actually perfect because for me to take what he wrote and put it into a script that I can build a graphic novel on, that's perfect. Like, I do not need very complex literature. So that's one of the main book. And the second one is this book written by Jean Franco, who was the lead of the expedition. And that book is also very informative because it's really focusing on the mountaineering expedition. And there's tons of logistical information about how they put this expedition together, how the actual ascent happened. And for the record, my great uncle did not take part into the final ascent. He actually didn't care. Like, the highest peak just meant nothing to him. He was way more interested in mapping the rocks in the surrounding area. So he was not part of the ascent. So there's sometimes these two groups were living very different experiences. And obviously didn't know what the other ones were living. There's also times that they were all together, and that's very interesting because they sometimes have very diverging opinions on similar events. So I basically get, I cannot talk to the people, but I have these, and that's basically all I have. And that really helps me to fit into my own story. So this is the team of the French alpinists. So there were 8 alpinists, 2 doctors, and 2 geologists, including my great uncle. Not all these people took part in both expeditions. My great uncle was part of both. And here I've put like an original photo and a panel that I drew. And I drew the panel. So that's about the departure when they leave, they are boarding their plane from Paris to head to Nepal. And I drew that panel before I knew about the existence of on that picture. And I obviously completely screwed up the dressing code. I wanted to take a minute and just realize that these men were heading for like a 2-month-long expedition in a rugged, remote country, and they were wearing suits and ties. This is incredible. So I totally missed that point because, you head to the mountains, you wear your mountain gear, right? Everybody does that. Not back in the days. So they obviously had, French class was something. This is them. So I got these photographs are also like very amazing material for me. I got them from a specialist of mountaineering history who lives in France. And for the longest time, so I basically got really involved in this project in January this year. And for the longest time, it was really hard for me to know what some of these men even looked like. So the first guys at the top, Franco, Magnan, Cousy, and Terre, are really famous. If you Google their name, you'll find information about them, you'll find photos. So I somewhat knew what these 4 looked like and what they had done in their lives. The 4 others were more like the kind of the junior team, and not to minimize at all their accomplishment, but it's been really, really challenging for me to find any information about them. And for several months, I had no idea what they even looked like. Again, my great uncle was taking lots of pictures, but mostly of mountains. So ironically, I found out about these 4 guys when the last one at the bottom right there, Serge Coupé, actually died this year. He died in April this year. And I stumbled on a paper about his death. And in the paper, there were 2 pictures of him and his 3 buddies. And I had never seen these pictures before, so I contacted the author of the paper. And then, from one contact to the other, I ended up with these amazing pictures and more. So that really helps me to put a face on the men who were part of the expedition and part of the story. And even though they are not necessarily all going to be main characters of the graphic novel, I want to show that they were there no matter what. So this is kind of how I ended up being able making their portraits, but it took a while. So I want to speak a little bit about the logistics behind this expedition. At first, when I started to get interested in that project, I was actually blown away about the logistics behind just the preparation and the travel from leaving France and just getting to Nepal, how much of a trip that was already and how much of an adventure it was on its own. And I didn't even know if it was going to be necessary for me to speak about the rest, because really it was quite the trip. So I've tried to represent like the two different expeditions there, so 54 and 55. So the first thing, the equipment. So in 1954, they brought 7 tons of equipment by boat. So from Genoa all the way to Mumbai, and then all these 7 tons were carried by train all the way to the border with Nepal, and then they were carried into Nepal on man's back, basically. 7 tons. The following year, they brought twice as much. They had cached some of it at base camp, and obviously the 7 tons included food and tents and expedition supplies. But yeah, they were not traveling light. Part of the shipment of equipment in 1955, a very important piece of that expedition was oxygen. So the French expedition, from what I understand about mountaineering history and Himalayan expeditions, they were one of the first expeditions to really have a protocol for the use of oxygen and use it in a very systematic way. At the time, so back in the 50s, you basically had 2 camps, the ones who thought that using oxygen was cheating, and the ones who thought that, you know, above 7,000 meters, not using oxygen would mean dying. So they decided to, they did tons of research. So month and month and month before that expedition started, they developed, like, even from the concept of the bottles themselves into the mix of gas they were going to put inside the bottle. And then they developed a protocol of how they were going to use it. And it worked. They basically followed their protocol by the letter, and they had like literally no issue during the actual ascent. So that was a big part of the shipment. And like reading about it, it's crazy. Like they basically, the shipment was supposed to end up in Kolkata, and then there was a docker strike, so it couldn't get there, ended up in Yangon, and then they had to send a guy to like go get the bottles to like ship them back to Nepal. Anyways, it took weeks for like a very crucial part of their equipment. As far as how the people traveled, so it was a combination of train, boat, and plane. Even by plane, which was one of the fastest way to travel at the time, they had to do multiple fuel stops all across the Middle East. So it took overall like 36 hours for them to just reach Delhi. And then from Delhi on a train, and again, from the border of the southern border of Nepal, they hiked all the way up. So these are some pictures from the actual trip. So that's when they arrive in Delhi. They obviously use the combination of hiking and using the local transportation modes. Crossing, again, some pretty lush forest, even at high elevation. And this is one of the villages, basically, that's currently on the Makalu trail. And they were also crossing some pretty interesting river crossings. So I got pretty terrified on my trip there by some of the bridges, but that was nothing compared to what they had to go across back then. So just imagine like going across these things with like 7 tons of equipment. They basically were camping at some of these bridges for days just to get their equipment across. And these are some pictures, the few pictures I have from the team, so on the spot. So these are taken by my great uncle. They were all like wearing these equipment provided for the expedition specifically. So they're all dressed the same, which really doesn't help when I have to identify them and draw them, because they're all wearing hats and sunglasses and the same jacket. But yeah, so that's a few pictures of how they were. I really like this picture. They are all staring at Makalu. This is at base camp. And I imagine they are staring towards Makalu, like what else would they be doing? So that's before the ascent. And you can see my great uncle in the back there wearing his beret, right? This is one of their advanced base camps. So I didn't get to go as far as that, but I have actually quite a few pictures of their the higher part of the climb. And then I also really love this picture. This is after they submitted Makalu. And I don't know, first of all, I love their style. And I want you to take a minute to notice the smoke, the pipe, and the bottle of wine. So back to the equipment, you can see like a box of cookies there, bottles of wine. I mean, they had the French style, obviously. But that also kind of brings back the discussion about these 7 tons of equipment that they brought with them and what was actually in the boxes. So my great uncle, there's one story that I really want to include in my graphic novel where he explains how they carried these full wheel of cheese all the way from France. And it was literally, like the big wheels of Gruyere. And so they carried it all the way from France, and then they got to India. So that was in the fall of 54. So basically the monsoon was ended. It was like 90% humidity and 50 degrees outside. By the time they got to the Makalu Trail, the box containing the cheese was so heavy because the cheese had been absorbing all the humidity and was moldy as hell. So I just have a little thought for the guy who carried that wheel of cheese on his back for weeks, and it was never consumed. So yeah, they were not traveling light. They were not bringing just the essentials, but they knew how to celebrate their ascent. And so the question is, who was carrying these 7 tons of gear, right? Well, here is an answer. You can see like all the gear nicely laid out in numbered bags. And so they actually had a ratio of, for one French alpinist, 10 porters. So they had a crew of even more at some point, actually, from when they did like the part of the hiking from India into Nepal. At some point, they got up to 500 people hiking with them. So what happened is that the word went through the valley that the French expedition was hiring. And from what I understand, for back in the days, they were paying really well. So each porter had a salary of 2 rupees that they were getting at the end. However, it was so much money for them at the time that some smart little guys decided to like sub-hire other people. So they basically got the money and got some other people to carry the gear for them. So in the end, they may have hired like 100 people and they ended up quickly with like 400. It got totally out of control. Yeah, so it took that's another reason why it took them a really long time to eventually get to base camp, because they had a ridiculous amount of people and gear to bring with them. This picture, I find again, it really points out to these colonizing history and kind of the spirit at the time, and it's disturbing, but it's also interesting to look at it. I mean, I take it as it's a slice of history and it's archive, but having these 3 guys wearing hats while basically the doctor is checking each potential candidate for the hike and literally checking out the muscle mass, it's pretty crazy. So I took this image and I'm thinking of including it in the story. It's simplified a little bit here, but yeah, that's basically how they hired all these people in the valley and basically kind of went all the way up to camp. And I've included a few more pictures of these porters who took part of the expedition. And I'm obviously using all this material as well. It's really precious documentation for me to see how the people were dressed, what they were wearing, and also how young they were. There's actually a lot of kids in that crew. And I mean, the life expectancy these days in Nepal is not very high, but back in the days, it was even lower. So it's, yeah, really, really young people overall took part in that trip. And further up, so basically, as they were going higher up, the crew was getting a little smaller. They did not need as many people as they were going further away. And the few Sherpas who actually took part in the final ascent were equipped with the same gear than the French crew. So they basically brought like enough boots and jackets and everything and glasses for them. So these guys are all wearing like really good gear from back in the days. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the actual process of making the graphic novel. So in my case, I'm using very traditional medium. So I use ink, technical pens, dip pen, and paper. I use a little bit of like digital drawing for doing only like minor corrections and basically assembling the pages at the end. And for the text as well, but basically all the drawing I do it on paper. So there are a lot of different steps into creating a graphic novel. Obviously, you need to have a story to tell, and then all the following steps are really, for me, it's really like a back and forth between all of them. It's not like you write your script and then you move on and you never touch it again. Like it's really an iterative process. And some authors may do things in slightly different order. Everybody really has their own process. This is kind of how I do it. And eventually the ultimate goal is to publish, obviously. So this is kind of an idea of how I build my script. So a script for graphic novel is really like a script for movies. So you basically, for each panel, each scene, you set up the stage, what's happening, where is it happening, who is there, and then the text is either a narration or dialogues. And in my case, I have 2 columns for the text because I'm planning to do the book in English and in French. So I'm trying to do both sort of simultaneously. It's not adding any work at all. This is a very important step of building a graphic novel. That's called the thumbnails. And the thumbnails are basically a quick, dirty drawing of the layout of each page. The reason why it's important is like in a movie, you wanna set up each scene, know how long it's gonna last, know which angle you're gonna be filming people. Is it gonna be a close-up? Is it gonna be a distant view? You have to basically do the exact same work of staging things for the graphic novel. So each panel, I'm like, okay, what do I want to say here? And to say that, what's the best way to convey that information? So I basically lay out each page. You always have to have in mind that this is meant to be a published product. So it's meant to be a book. So basically, when you read a page as a reader, you want to end up your page on, some kind of cliffhanger or something. So you have to think about all that. And obviously, the way you yell your story, lay out your story, is going to define the script. So that's why, like these 2 stages, I work on them back and forth. And to the right is a slightly more evolved version of the thumbnails. Also pretty rough, like the drawing really doesn't have to be pretty. It's really about laying out the whole story. And then the pencil stage follows up. So this is not an actual example of pencil because the concept of penciling your pages is done on the final piece of paper. And then you basically ink over it. So all my pencils are inked over at the moment. So I don't have any real pencil to show, but the pencil is basically a more detailed version of your thumbnails, and that's basically meant to be as close as possible to the final drawing. Ideally, all you want to do is, when you ink, is to cover up your lines, your line work. So basically, with all that, like each page is been redrawn 3 or 4 times, because from the moment you like lay out the thumbnails, and it changes like 3 or 4 times. So you're gonna be redrawing the same panels over and over in like slightly more evolved version each time. within all that, you obviously have to learn how to draw the people who are part of the story. So I talked about it earlier, that's like a bit of a challenge for me because of the access to photographs and knowing who they were, like even their personality is going to define how you draw them. And not knowing these people, not being able to talk to them, makes it really challenging for me to draw them. And finally, like once you've done your script and your thumbnails and your penciling and redrawn things over and over, there's the inking of the final pages. So for this particular story, I'm using 2 different colors of ink. The sepia ink that you see on the left here is basically to tell the parts of the story that take place in 54 and 55. I thought it was a nice way to represent the past. The black and white ink, I use it to represent the part of the story that take place in 2019, so related to my experience. And what I'm planning to do in the final book is to basically play a little bit, like take a little bit of freedom with the time and mix up the time. Like, I mean, I may as well do a little bit of fiction. I have all the freedom, so I'm going to use these inks to kind of connect the reader to a specific time. But I'm going to mix them sometimes on the same panel or on the same page. Yeah, so that's a couple of examples of inked pages. And to wrap up, we're going to go back, come back to the 2020s. So we're going to leave Basecamp. This is a picture of Basecamp from Basecamp, taken by my great uncle back in 1955. And the mountain in the back is actually not Makalu. Makalu is in his back. But that's another, like, you know, just over 7,000 meters, no big deal. And when I went to Makalu myself, I found the exact same spot that he took that picture, you know, same rocks in the foreground and everything. So yeah, that's wrapping up the journey. We're not quite back here, but at least back in time to a time closer. Thank you very much. Anyone has any questions? I have, so for the people who are in the room, I brought some examples of my sketches. If you want to have a look, they're on the table here. So you can put your mask back on and kind of come to the table. I brought the books, the 2 books that I'm using as a main source. And in the black portfolio is some of my final inked pages, if you want to have a look at them. So yeah.
When do you want to publish? If you could have an ideal date.
Well,
could you repeat the question for people?
Okay, so the question is when I'm planning to publish, when I'm thinking of publishing. Earlier this year, I was thinking I would be able to publish by the end of 2021. That seems a little more unlikely now. I don't know. I think I haven't really done much work on it for the past few months. So I need to get back into it and make a plan, and I need to find a publisher. And I think I'm just realizing that because publishers are going to have constraints of, you know, size and just like page layout. And if I don't have that nailed down, there's no point for me to like get too carried away. So I have to like think about a plan basically, and that I'm planning to do in the next few months. So yeah, so hopefully publishing no later than 2022. That's my idea. Yeah.
Did you do much experimentation with the visual style?
So the question is, did I do much experimentation with the visual style? I kind of dove like right into it. Like in January this year, I decided, okay, I'm gonna make a graphic novel out of this. I started to work on the thumbnails. Like I did about 30 pages worth of thumbnails. And then I was like, I need to test it out. Like I need to see if this is gonna work. So I started inking really quick. And to be honest, like out of the inked pages that I've done back in February, like I'm probably gonna have to redo them all because it's mostly my drawing style has evolved. And there's nothing you can do against that. It's just the nature of it. However, I'm pretty set on the like the use of 2 different inks, and like from that point on, it's just practice, and then working on building the story. But yeah, it's basically the first graphic novel that I get to work on, and I could obviously experiment a lot of other things. I have other smaller projects that I'm going to do that. I'm going to experiment other things. For that one, I feel like it's a big project enough, and I have a good plan, at least for in terms of the look of it. And I'm just gonna stick to it because it's gonna be long enough to to wrap it up. Any questions online from the online audience?
No, but we do have a couple comments from people who really appreciate it.
Okay. Okay, awesome.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
I know you're getting in touch with like people from your family and
Yeah.
people from the climbing community, and I know that like including the story of the Sherpas and the porters is an important aspect of that historically and in the context of the world today.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you'll reach out at all to anyone who might be connected from those communities, or if you talk to people while you're
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. So the question is, I was talking about how I had reached out to family members and members of the climbing community in Europe. And Erin is asking if I'm gonna be reaching out or if I have already reached out to people from the local communities in Nepal who may have insights into that story. So I started to do that part when I was there. Basically, so when I headed to Makalu in 2019, I did not know yet that I was going to do a graphic novel out of it, but I knew that I wanted to do some kind of project, some kind of artistic project out of it. So I was sort of prepared. So what I did is I printed a series of photos from my great uncle. And I made a little booklet because I figured it would be impossible to have anything digital on the trail. So I made a little booklet of photos, and out of the photos, I had photos of places and photos of people and photos of villages down in the valley. And so I didn't put it in that presentation, but there's it was actually a really amazing icebreaker. Like I would show up to these, so first of all, I had a guide. I had hired a guide from Canberra. Well, he's from Sedowa, but that was through an association in Canberra, and they are named Makalu Arun Social Treks, and they do tons of community support and everything. They are really like they are based out of Eastern Nepal, and they pretty much only operate in that area. So from these people, I showed up with my story and my photos, and they were really helpful in trying to connect me with other people. And we literally like took walks through the villages with my booklet, and then they would like stop people and say, hey, like, do you know where this is? And I have these amazing pictures of these people looking at so me taking a picture of the people looking at the pictures from my great uncle. And yeah, it was really amazing. And so I carried that booklet all the way on the hike, and I was taking it out of my backpack every night and showing it to the Sherpas and porters in the lodges. And sometimes they didn't, like, basically the issues that the people on these photos are dead for the most part. Again, they could have been very old today if their life expectancy had been any better. Unfortunately, I really doubt that I'm going to be able to track some of these people. So they may have kids and relatives that are still alive, but I was not able to track these people back then. However, yeah, that book was it was a really amazing icebreaker on the trail and a really good conversation starter. And the communication was challenging. Like not all the locals were speaking English, but it was somehow we managed to understand each other, because I had the picture, and I would say great uncle, like great father, whatever, grandfather. Like, you know, they understood that I had a connection there in history, in time. Yeah, so there was that part, and I'm still, because at the time I was not really set on what I was going to do with it. I had a bit of a purpose, but not as clear as now. So I feel like I should go back, and now with like a better purpose and a better idea, be a little more specific into what I'm looking for. But yeah, so I have tried, and I haven't given up yet. Like I think I could do more about it, but it's going to be hard to do it remotely. That's all. So yeah.
Okay.
Good. Thank you very much. Thanks, Rick, for doing all the tech, and thank you, Construct, for hosting. That was really great to have that space and be able to do it, not in front of a computer. Well, not for me.